Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel for another astrophotography video. So this takes place obviously a little bit after the event happened. So of course there was a blood moon eclipse about a week ago, and I definitely wanted to try and capture that the best that I could. So I sat up outside of work, which was one of my busier nights on Thursday night, and essentially I brought my S50, I brought my Nikon P900 Coolpix, which is like the super zoom, my phone, tripod, all that good stuff. And while the Nikon did okay for a little bit, I really botched a lot of the shots with like my SLR and stuff like that. So it was okay at the front of the eclipse when the moon still had a decent brightness to it, but as the colors changed and stuff, I just wasn't familiar enough with it. However, the S50, the ZWO Seestar, amazing. So obviously I'm doing this after the video. I wanted to see if it would get first and kind of explain what we did here. So for the S50, and it is of course the smart telescope slash smart astrophotography camera that I used in part 1 and will use in part 3, 4, etc. It has a lunar mode, so essentially you can do in solar system mode, which means you can do basic camera, 2x, 4x, etc. And you can also do videos, you can do time lapses. So essentially if you're doing Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, whatever else is in the solar system that you want to try and capture, that's a good way to do so. So I used the lunar mode for this one, sat outside at my job at about 2:30 to 3:30 in the morning for this, and it turned out awesome. So I recorded 30 minutes of the eclipse, and it was awesome. It was super cool to see. It was my very first time seeing of the blood moon, and a full eclipse essentially. I recorded again like the back half of the 30 minutes for the first stage of the eclipse. I'm going to put that whole video in here. You can obviously skip through it. If you do like 2x speed, you can actually see the color changing of the moon as well. I've debated like speeding it up on its own. However, if you just want to watch the full transformation, it is also really cool. So I will not be offended if you skip ahead a little bit. I will also include, of course, the photos from the S50. So essentially, yes, I did a video on it. However, I turned it into solar system lunar mode, which is just like the photo op, and did a bunch of like 2x shots. I think 4x might have been like the farthest I went with it, but it exceeded my expectations for how good it would look. And I'm super, super happy with how it actually turned out. Thank you all so much, by the way, for the success for this series already. This is part 2, and the ZWO is one of my most successful videos on either channel ever. Part 1 of my astrophotography video series, not just talking about hardware, was the Orion Nebula, and I posted that last week, and it's doing super well. So thank you all so much. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I was honestly worried. I didn't know putting astrophotography with the fishing and the birding aspect, how it would work out. I didn't expect it to crush the other two. So that's definitely pretty insane how well it's doing. So hopefully the rest of the series does well. I hope you guys actually got to witness the eclipse too. Leave me a comment below if you guys did get to see it. Also, I fixed my lighting. Yep, finally. It wasn't my hat. You know, I saw a couple of comments with that. It was actually the light I was using was just not near bright enough, so I got one that can actually attach to the top of my tripod, and that way it's not as obnoxious as like a huge ring light. It's just a little puck light, and it is doing fantastic. Like, the lighting in this room is amazing now, so I'm really happy with that. It did super well. The lighting, you know, definitely worked out a little bit better. So I don't want to ramble on too much for the intro, but I just kind of wanted to go through like the specs and everything of what we were doing, and it turned out super great. One officer drove by and saw me camped out in my parking lot. Thankfully, I think it was somebody that knows who I was, and he just drove past, like, looking at me, and I'm just like pointing at the moon, like that's not a weird thing to do. But it got super good. So if you guys are interested in, like, again, the S50 or anything like that, the lunar mode, awesome. Planetary mode, it's not made for planets, but the lunar mode is a really good exception to like closer objects for it, and I'm super happy. So if you have the S50 and when you want to do like a lunar video or something like that, go into the solar system option and then go from there. You can play around with it a little bit. You can also center the object. My final photo was a little bit off center. However, it was really well autofocused, and I was just trying to get the photos there. So rather than like overcropped and stuff like that, I kept it pretty natural. So I will include all the photos and stuff in there as well, including I think I took a couple screenshots of like what you'd be seeing live on the camera as well. because I like to kind of show you guys, hey, if you're using this, this is what you're kind of looking at, depending on, you know, what like sky brightness and stuff that you're in. But it was super cool to see. I hope you guys got to witness the eclipse as well. So let's get the video rolling, everybody.